I have iron sights at the 11 o'clock, and when I train both ways using the optic and the iron sights.
Cool.
I would never want to lose that critical skill, because you never know what tool you're going to have to pull out of the toolbox at the time of catastrophic failure. Just everything going around you. So
cool. Do you have iron sights or a red dot on that iron back there? Is that iron?
You can see
tactical iron.
Meet the Pressers with Matt Mallory and Klint Macro. Brought to you by Public Safety and Education and the Trigger Pressers Union. And now, your hosts.
This episode is brought to you by Mantis. Mantis X helps shooters suck less. Meet the Pressers is sponsored by Next Level Training, Saber Red, Cutting Edge Bullets, the USCCA, McLean Corporation, ASP, Custom Poker Chip Company, Common Sense Self-Defense, and T1 Ammunition. Meet the Pressers is also generously supported by these fine companies, ranges, and our Patreon members. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Meet the Pressers. I'm Matt Mallory, and my esteemed co-host, Klint Macro, here to say hi to you. And we've got a very special guest.
Yeah, our guest today is an Arizonan. He's a trigger presser from way back. He does competitive shooting. His day job is a photojournalist, but one of the main reasons we have him on the show here today is because he has experienced something that we talk about in all of our defensive classes. He's been through a dynamic critical incident, and it's a very unique one. So I would like to introduce Thomas Yoxall. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
So would you tell the story? We first met you with Cheryl Todd. She introduced us to you at a SHOT Show, and she says, you got to hear this guy's story. And so we met with you very briefly. You told us a story. It's like, our viewers need to hear this story.
Definitely.
So
Real
the floor
life.
is yours.
So January 12th, 2017, I was actually heading west on I-10 to Disneyland, of all places. I was traveling with a companion, and it was approximately 4:30 in the morning, and we came across a scene where an Arizona state trooper, and we didn't know this at the time, but he'd already been shot in the right shoulder.
Wow.
Bad guy was on top of him, and when I say that, think of a UFC fight where one fighter has the other one in full mount and just landing blows and slamming his head into the asphalt. I exit vehicle, ask trooper if he needs assistance. He gives an affirmative, tell the bad guy to stop. Bad guy doesn't stop, and I'm forced to use lethal force to stop the situation. And that's really encapsulating it in a nutshell. I get that, but those are the broad strokes before we break it down. My companion called 911. I turned to her, call 911. So she's relaying information, mile marker, what's going on. And then as soon as that threat is neutralized, I go into first responder mode and provide assistance to the trooper until help arrives.
Could you explain about how you recognize what was going on? What drew your attention, and through that recognition process where you decided, yes, I'm going to intervene here. I'm going to come to this person's aid.
So for those who know Arizona and that stretch of I-10, there's a road called Miller Road. And there's a truck stop there, and we had stopped at the truck stop, top off the tank, get road snacks, coffee. It's 4:00 in the morning, 4:15 at this point. When we get back onto I-10 and we start heading west, the next exit is Interstate 8, which will take you to Yuma, San Diego. Well, Trooper Anderson actually gets onto the I-10 at that point. His lights are already on, and he's bombing down the freeway, the interstate. So at that point, we already knew something was going on. It's like, someone's having a bad start to their day. Hopefully everybody's all right. Now, as we continue to drive, we see his lights again in the distance, and, they're getting closer. And I actually noticed that vehicles are moving from the number 2 lane to the number 1 lane. And to me, that says accident, maybe road debris.
Right.
They're giving the trooper some space who's in, that right shoulder area, lane 2 area. And then as we get even closer, I notice his flare pattern. And to me, knowing law enforcement, I have friends in law enforcement, that flare pattern says, hey, divert. So now I'm really thinking vehicle accident, road debris, and I don't want to add to the situation. So I had reduced my speed significantly, and I'm now straddling the left shoulder in lane 1. When we get up to the back of his patrol vehicle and those road flares, we see him directly in front of the vehicle. And like I said, the bad guy's on top of him, you know, slamming his head into the concrete and hitting him. So at that point, again, everything was automatic. So born and raised in Arizona, I started shooting at the age of 5, started hunting at the age of 6, and I could say I actively started training at the age of 21. I was 44 when this happened. So this is 23 years of training, 23 years of me telling myself I'm going to be the one that intervenes in a situation like this. And so everything from that point on was an automated response. There was no stopping to think. It was just, I've always put it, it was just by the numbers. It's what I was always said I was going to do. So I look at my companion and I tell her to call 911. I give my vehicle some gas because in my head, I need so much space to adequately work safely if I'm going to, render a positive outcome response.
Definitely.
So when I exit my vehicle, guns in my hand, I'm already in the close ready. And to try to put it in perspective for those watching, I am now turned around and I am facing east, and I'm looking directly at the trooper's cruiser. And there's a gap of about 80 feet, give or take. And I step to what would be, if you look at, think of it as me in the 6 o'clock position and the troopers in the 12 o'clock position, I step towards the 9 o'clock because his lights are on and they're blinding me a little bit. That's just, again, it was automated. It was step. And I'm advancing this whole time though. There was a dead female already on the scene. And that's when, thinking back on it now, subconsciously I'm checking off threats. Dead female, she's not a threat. I could see the bad guy doesn't have anything in his hands weapons wise. So that's another, no threat off the list. Trooper still has his gun holstered, not a threat. I see a gun in the number 1 lane with a slide lock back. So again, at this point, I'm coming up on the 12 o'clock. I'm already bridged a significant amount of space. Trooper, do you need assistance? He yells out the affirmative. And I have a strong voice and I yell out to the bad guy to stop. He tells me to shut up. Like he literally says, shut up. At this point, I had circled around to roughly the 2 o'clock position because also in my head, I'm thinking clear line of fire, clear line of fire.
Backdrop.
I do not want this trooper to be in my line of fire. But as soon as he tells me to shut up, he lifts his arms up to strike the trooper again. And that's when I pushed forward. I fired 4 times. At the time, I thought I only fired 3, but of course, forensics and the detective work. But I struck him 3 times. It was once to center mass and twice to the head, effectively putting an end, a very quick end to the situation. At that point, again, 1 bad guy, possibly 2. So, I'm kind of looking to see if there's anything else I need to be aware of.
Assessing your situation.
Before I holster back, well, I didn't even have a holster, but before I release and kind of come back from that posture, my companion had just gotten off the phone with 911. And so I leaned down by the trooper. I let him know that everything's going to be okay. I literally told him that guy's not going to bother me anymore. Where are you injured? This is my name. I'm Thomas. Where are you injured? Get a first aid kit out of his vehicle. And so now I'm in that first responder mode. I know that there's only so much I can do based on the poor first aid kit that we had. And now it's a waiting game.
The lady that was on the ground expired when you arrived. What was her relationship to the situation?
So the bad guy and the female were boyfriend and girlfriend, and they were actually traveling westbound on I-10 going towards Tonopah. Bad guy has a negligent discharge. He discharges his gun twice in the vehicle, causes the vehicle to roll over out into the right shoulder area into the desert. He's seatbelted. She's not. She gets ejected and dies on impact. He crawls out of the vehicle with his gun. The initial reports that Trooper Anderson responded to were of a car accident. So when he arrives on the scene,
the
he
flares.
sees the suspect holding the dead girlfriend.
Yep.
And Trooper Anderson, when he and I talked about it, he's like, he was speaking Spanish. I couldn't understand him. He starts pointing out to the desert. He takes his flashlight. He sees the vehicle. And now in his head, I'm dealing with a rollover accident. That's what I'm going to radio it as. That's what I'm setting flare patterns for.
Yep.
And while Trooper Anderson's setting those flares, he doesn't realize the bad guy, drops his dead girlfriend, comes around to the passenger side of Trooper Anderson's cruiser. Trooper Anderson closes the door. He looks, and now all he sees is the dead female. He starts scanning around for the bad guy. He comes around the front of his vehicle to the passenger side. Bad guy's already there with his gun pushed out. It's the last bullet in the bad guy's gun, and it hits Trooper Anderson in the right shoulder, but barely misses his vest. Blows out his joint, travels down, exits through the back. Luckily, it didn't hit anything internally.
Wow.
And the fight starts at that point, and the bad guy hit Trooper Anderson in the top of the skull with his gun, slide lock back. Trooper Anderson's trying to grab his gun. He can't. Now he realizes, oh, crap, I'm shot. And he's fighting this guy. And this guy is just hitting him with a gun, and then they're down on the ground, and Trooper Anderson's trying to kick him out in the street. They figured he fought for about 4 minutes before I got there. And initially, well, I shouldn't say initially, there was a couple times where people had said, that cop, he got surprised and he couldn't fight that guy off and everything. And I'm like, okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to shoot you in the shoulder, and then I'm going to crack your skull with a friggin', open slide lock gun. Yeah. And we're going to see how long you hold up.
With 50
4
pounds
minutes is a lifetime.
Yeah, with 50 pounds of gear on, one-armed.
Yeah. Right. So Trooper Anderson, I refer to him as one of the most badass Spartans I know, because he fought like no other. First DPS rolls up on the scene, Sergeant Bill Westick, very beautiful man, just generous. He was a good person. But when he rolled up, he rolled out hot. I mean, he came out of his cruiser with his AR slung and drawn down in that close ready position. And again, as I'm waiting for this, I'm thinking, I know what's going to happen. So I take, and some people were like, I can't believe he did that. But I took my gun and I put it in the right shoulder. At this point, I know there's no other danger. But I also know law enforcement's coming, and they have limited information. And they just know that one of their brothers has been shot, he's been injured. And so they're going to come in hot. Yep. So as soon as he exits his vehicle, my hands go up in the air. My name's Thomas. This is Trooper Anderson. You have a dead female behind me about 60 feet. This is your dead suspect. My gun is over here in the right shoulder. Bad guy's gun is in lane number 1, and give him as much information as I possibly can. So now he can take control of the situation, and he can start to bring his levels down a little bit. Yep. And then next thing you know, we hear the air vac, and then it was like Christmas in January with the amount of lights. I mean, it was like you closed your eyes for a second, opened them up, and there were dozens of vehicles, law enforcement and first responders both. And that's when things just, I mean, your brain defends itself. It defends you by defending itself. So they separate us, which they have to. It's protocol. And I'm in Sergeant Westick's cruiser. And the thing I'm thinking is, I'm looking at my watch going, if I could get back on the road here, maybe the next hour, I could beat rush hour traffic. This is, I'm still in good shape here. He gets in the cruiser, by this time he has the suspect's ID. I see 3 IDs. I immediately know. And some people were like, well, that's kind of prejudicial of you. I'm sorry. The guy was Hispanic with 3 IDs. He was an illegal. I knew it just by that standard issue protocol of what I was seeing. But now I'm starting to write what I refer to as my shitty first draft. And that's not my phrase, it's somebody else's. But that's what I was doing. Because if Trooper Anderson doesn't make it, it's my fault. I didn't respond quickly enough. I didn't render proper enough aid. And I'm really starting to freak out about this. I'm also concerned about my companion, because she's in another cruiser and she literally just saw me blow somebody's brains out. And I mean, that last shot opened up the back of the bad guy's skull and everything went out on the I-10. So now I'm starting to get anxious. And at this point, they allow me to talk to my companion. She gave perfect information to the 911 operator for not having any type of formal training or anything. She, acted flawlessly. making sure she's okay. And then they shuffle me to a first responder vehicle that's in the left shoulder by lane number 1. I'm still in the westbound lanes.
So she stayed on with the 911 operator through the whole situation?
Yes, and she's relaying information the best that she can, given the situation and how fast it went down. From the time I exited in my truck to the time I fired that last shot, they said it was somewhere between 7 to 10 seconds. I'll say fast. 10 seconds, but it was fast, faster than what people think. And when you look at the totality of it, where I had to bridge roughly 80, 85 feet, and I finally saw the picture of my truck. There's a gap of space, a huge fire truck, a gap of space. And then, that was a distance. But to be able to bridge that gap effectively, fire 4 times and hit 3 at 4:30 in the morning with the only light I have is whatever light's coming off the trooper's vehicle. I thought I did pretty good.
How much coffee did you have?
I hadn't even had a chance to finish my first cup. Man. I'm telling you. So there was a lot of, once they put me in that first responder vehicle, it starts sinking in. Yeah. I reach out to my kids via text message and some people that I know, saying, hey, I'm okay, but you're going to see something on the news. Mm-hmm. Whatever you do, don't talk to me, because now in my head, I'm fearful. Media's going to find out who I am. I don't want them harassing people that I know. I certainly don't want them looking for me. And I think it was at that point that a female firefighter from Buckeye called me a hero. And I immediately said, no, I'm not a hero. God got involved here. This was all God's work. He's the one who gave me the courage and the will to do this. And, that's what I firmly believed. And that's kind of part of the story as far as when I give my presentation, that coming back to the faith, and this just really solidified it for me. Now from there, they actually shuffle me into a fire truck, an actual fire engine. And I'm sitting in the back. I'm thinking in my head, what do you when you're going to drive, you're dressed comfortably. So I'm in a pair of 511 tack shorts, a t-shirt and a hoodie. I'm freezing. I haven't had my coffee. And now people are going, hey, do you need anything? Do you need anything? Yeah, my coffee and my can of Skol that's in my truck. Okay. Because this is not good. And still in my head, I'm going, man, if we could just hurry up and get back on the road, right. We can get there. But then again, I couldn't really get any information about Trooper Anderson, and that was again freaking me out. I'm asking, how Heidi's doing, and I'm concerned about her well-being. At some point, I realized I did have a can of Skol in that side pocket. Yep. And here's the thing, just my hands were bloody. They were bloody from the bad guy. They were bloody from Trooper Anderson. I can't wash my hands because they need to swab them. But what do? I still take a dip of Skol because, you know what, damn it, I needed one. So I didn't care at that point.
Stress.
Bloodborne pathogen was not on your mind.
No, it wasn't. It was getting a fix.
Well, that might be a Skol commercial right there.
Right.
Skol sponsor.
So good that I just had to have it. Now, at that point, DPS upper commands there. Tim Mason was actually the one that was running the scene at the time, from what I can remember. And again, everybody did such an amazing job, and they were as courteous as they can be. Let's be honest. It's a crime scene. Yep. It doesn't matter what I say. They still have to prove that that's what actually happened.
Exactly.
At some point, Detective Lamb from DPS approached me and he said, hey, we want to ask you some questions. We want to get your official statement. You don't have to talk to me, but I would like you to. In my mind, I had done nothing wrong. I had nothing to fear. This was, in my opinion, a clean shoot. And I said, yes, whatever you need. But in my head too, I'm thinking, God, okay, this will be it. I talked to him and, I can get on the road. That whole mentality of getting away from the scene, as far away from the scene, was safety. Driving away meant safety to me. Being back in my truck meant safety to me. So they took us back to Buckeye. We did the formal interviews at Buckeye PD. Again, they were very polite.
And you did this without a lawyer there.
Absolutely. And I tell everybody, hey, I probably did this completely wrong, but I'm also a firm believer that if your heart of hearts, you're right, there's nothing to hide. There was no fear in my head as far as that goes. And we can debate the sense of that. And I've taken plenty of critical incidents classes where they say, hey, you should wait, you know, a minimum.
Well, I do believe this is a very, very special case.
Yeah,
I mean, this wasn't like two people that were involved in an exchange. This was you coming to the aid of a law enforcement officer,
right,
who was
who lived
clearly in jeopardy.
Yeah, and so we gave our statements. They weren't quite ready for us to take us back to my truck. So Detective Lamb bought us lunch, and that was very awkward because, you know, how do you make small talk? You know, and my head still hasn't processed everything that happened. To me, it's still very like, oh, this is no big deal. I'm really thinking this is no big deal. I did what I always said I would do. I'm happy now that I know the trooper's going to be okay. And yeah, let's just get on with the day. So they finally got us back to the vehicle. As we're walking to the vehicle, they have the yellow tarp over the bad guy's body. I have grown men coming up to me in tears, thanking me, which freaked me out. And now I'm back closed off again. You know, the truck's so close. I just want to get in the truck and go. So we finally make it to the truck. We get in, we start driving. Now here's where people don't understand the harshness of it. When I fired that last shot, boom, it had actually hit the bad guy up underneath the throat. And like I said, it exploded the top of his head. I'm knelt down, I'm giving aid to Trooper Anderson, and I'm watching blood actively pump out of the entry wound. And I'm thinking, oh, that's kind of odd. And this is all happening in a flash. It's kind of odd. There's blood still pumping out. It's steaming. Well, you know, it's January. It's super cold outside right now. And, you know, the body's 98.7 degrees. I'm rationalizing it in my head. Well, now as I get in the truck and I start driving, that's the only thing I'm seeing. It's burned in, and I can't see anything else other than his head opening up and blood pumping out.
And it keeps replaying over and over and
over and over. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This is just not cool.
Yep.
By the time we made it to Anaheim and got checked in, it had gone coast to coast. And there was actually the BBC in the UK had picked up the story.
Wow.
And now I'm really, really freaked out. Because again, I don't want media to find out who I am. Mm-hmm. I just want things to be normal, and I didn't realize at that point that would never be the case again. You know, in your mind,
you're a good Samaritan. You just did what an average person would do, and you know, you wanted to go about your life the rest of the way. I saved the cop. I did what I did what had to be done. Done.
Yep.
And you want to go ride the teacup at Disney?
Yeah, Disney, Disneyland. Here we come.
Right, it's a small world.
It's like you just saved a trooper. Where are you going?
Where are you going? I'm going to Disney World. Yeah. So we ended up cutting the trip short. I tell you, as soon as we cross the California-Arizona state line, there's a trooper that has somebody pulled over, you know, eastbound I-10.
Comes right back.
I immediately flop sweat, shaking, hands grip the steering wheel, white knuckle, and in my head, I'm like, oh God, not again, not again, not again. And so, and that's when I started realizing, you know, there may be a problem here, you know, because there was no controlling that train once it left the station. And that's another thing that people don't understand, especially when I talk about the PTSD.
Memories.
And it, you know, and I'm not ashamed. I still see a therapist. I actually saw her yesterday. She's a great gal. I don't see her as often anymore, but it was a Phoenix PD officer by the name of James Bird. T and I were having a conversation, and he's been involved in a few use of lethal force incidents. And he said, you really have to accept and believe that it's never going to be the same. And once you do that, you can really start to move forward. And he said that to me, 4 or 5 months after the shooting. And I was having issues. I didn't want to sleep. The nightmares were so bad. At that point, I had already done the press conference, so people knew me. They knew my face. And it didn't almost seem like it didn't matter where I went. Somebody recognized me. And so when they're coming up to either shake my hand and say thank you or give me a hug and say thank you, it was bringing it all back. The first time I had a widow, which was I felt horrible for her because I'm at a law enforcement engagement and they gave me a plaque, which was very thoughtful of them, but they come off the stage and she comes up to me and she's crying and she gives me a hug and she's like, I wish somebody was there for my husband like you were there for that trooper. There's no way to respond to that. All I could do is start crying, and just to feel her hurt that she had, that's part of it. People don't get that that's part of it, and it's a real thing. And most people just want to hear about, hey, you shot the bad guy and that was great, woohoo. They don't want to hear about anything else. And in my presentation, I call it the pre-fight, the fight, and the post-fight. And the post-fight is that aftermath and dealing with everything and coming to grips with it. I had actually reached out to my pastor from California, from Anaheim, and he's like, hey, you did the right thing. You saved a man's life, and sure, you had to take one in order to do it. But that other person was obviously evil. They were a bad person. You know, they were intent on hurting anybody that they could. And he's like, and that might not offer you any comfort now, but just know that the good guy went home. And Trooper Anderson's a great guy. He and I have become really good friends. When our schedules allow, we see each other, we hang out. He's got 2 daughters. He's got a couple grandkids. His wife is super nice. He's been married for umpteen years. He's going to be coming up on his medical retirement here in just a little bit. So good for him. 30 years serving the community. But this guy's a youth sports coach for his local high school for volleyball and softball. And he gives back to his community on a daily basis. And so to know that he's really, truly one of the good guys, regardless of the uniform, this guy is generous beyond his means, and he just does it because that's the type of person he is.
And the goodness that he provides, it spreads and spreads and spreads. You know, you look at like It's a Wonderful Life. We watch that at Christmas time, and you think how many good people touch other good people, and that just continues to grow. And that could have ended that night had you not intervened.
To save somebody's life, I think is a great gift and a great blessing for anybody to experience. But I think on the circumstances, it comes with a price. One of the questions I've been asked a lot, you know, obviously I still carry, you know, they asked it at the press conference, would you do it again? In a heartbeat. This is who I am. I don't know any other way to be other than to protect and defend. Anybody who is being victimized by a stronger individual, I will stand up in defense for that person. I've always been that way. And I'm not ashamed about it. In my youth, have I gotten my ass kicked a couple times because I stood up to the bigger guy for the smaller guy? Sure. But at the end of the day, that's who I was born to be.
Just like the Ferguson effect with law enforcement being timid of doing their job because of what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. You know, we're seeing the same aspect of it on the flip side of it. And I've coined it the Zimmerman effect, the mindset of you don't even want to do what's right to keep your neighborhood safe in fear that, you know, your life's going to get turned upside down. So it takes a lot of courage to do that. It takes a lot of courage to do the right thing when most people could just drive right by, right?
And a lot of people did. Yeah, unfortunately,
diffusion of responsibility. That's not my problem. I'm just going to I'm not going to pay attention to that.
If hearing my story helps somebody either A, realize that I probably need to rethink my stance in carrying a firearm, or B, when I tell people, especially about the after effects and the PTSD, and my big thing is keeping it inside and everything, that's not courageous. That's a defense mechanism we have. Being vulnerable with your hurt is one of the most courageous things you could possibly do.
When you told me your story as far as the blood and the brains, it brought me back to some things that I've dealt with, and it's, you know, and it comes back. And there's been times in my life where something horrific happened or I saw, and it's in a loop, and you can't get rid of it. And no matter how much you think about it, no matter how much you breathe, or no matter what you do to try to get that out of your head and focus on something else, it's like it's literally like you're in Groundhog Day. It's there over and over and over and over. And time, talking about it, and people that understand and that can communicate with you and talk to you about it, and you can relate with that. That's what helps heal those wounds. But it is a wound. It's a mental wound that needs addressing.
You know, we not only want to win that physical encounter, hopefully by avoidance altogether, but there is that legal and that social and that moral aftermath that we're most certainly going to have to deal with. And I think a lot of times people that just train on the square range, they lose sight of all this other stuff. And in your case, the legal nightmare wasn't nearly what it may have been like with George Zimmerman.
Right.
Because, you know, I think what you went through specifically with being a law enforcement officer and coming to his aid definitely may have taken you a little bit out of that legal aftermath, especially because he could attest to the fact of what actually went down. But the moral and the social, I mean, what you're dealing with is something that people need to recognize is something they're very, very likely going to be dealing with too if they find themselves in this situation.
There were, you know, plenty of people. How come he didn't shoot? How come he didn't shoot to wound the person? Why did he have to kill him? You know, I've had people, when they find out I killed somebody in self-defense of somebody else, they shun me. You know, they're so anti-gun, anti-whatever. They just completely are dismissive of me, and they shun me, and they don't even want to speak to me. And again, that's the road they choose to walk. That's fine. You know, that's their business. So there is that stigma to some extent when people find out. And the confrontation as far as people like, oh my God, I want to hear how you smoked that guy, and I would do the same thing. And, you know, the tech-to-tards and tryhards is what I refer to them as. And I get offended. I'm like, okay, so let's back up a little bit and realize this is not Hollywood. Right. This was a traumatic experience. And if you're looking forward to the day that you get tested, stop. Sell your gun to the gun shop and take up knitting or crocheting or something, because you are not the person who should be doing it. And these were obviously people who I think, A, have nothing better to do, but B, probably have never been involved in an actual physical encounter, you know, in their lives. So they can't attest to that, again, that totality and what's going on, and just the snap, quick judgments you have to make. And at the end of the day, you hope you chose, you know, correctly and did the right thing.
Well, I think you did, because you are here and that officer is here.
Yeah. I agree.
Looking to your faith, in my opinion, is a great thing, and I'm very glad that you mentioned that here on the show.
Definitely, yeah. We try to interject that into the show as much as possible too, because those are the things. Politics and faith are the two things that we made a pledge to make sure that we have on our show that a lot of other shows don't.
Well, and I think that's great. I know sometimes when I've told my story, I've had a couple people go, or it could have just been luck, or, oh, it was coincidence. Yeah, no, I'm going to stand on the rock that says that was a guy that got involved. A couple interesting things. So my two vehicles, on the back of my Toyota Tundra, I have the back window wrapped completely with a thin blue line flag, and it's the scripture Joshua 1:9, because the Sunday before the shooting, I'm in church, and you know, the pastor gives a sermon, but always you got the note sheet and I'm taking notes, but there's always a scripture at the bottom. And sometimes it relates to what what we were talking about, and sometimes it doesn't. And that Sunday, it was Joshua 1:9, and I'm reading it. And right now I'm getting goosebumps and overwhelmed with emotion thinking, but I'm reading it and I break down in tears, because it was the first time in my life that I really felt forgiveness on my heart from the Lord and love. And I couldn't explain it. My friend Chris Harrell's there with me, and he's like, oh my God, are you okay? And I'm like, oh, I can't explain how good I feel. 4 days later, I'm involved in the shooting. I'm saving a man's life. Now, if you fast forward, the next time I go to church, it's Isaiah 6:8. And that's on the back of my other vehicle, because those scriptures are so powerful to me, and what they mean and what they represent to me and how they truly changed my life. I could never or would want to shy away or feel ashamed from speaking about my faith and my testimony to people about that. Whether they want to accept it or not, that's their business. But, you know, I could never talk about what happened and not give thanks and praise to my Lord and Savior. It would be wrong on my part to do. And I think people should understand that my story as a whole, knowing who I was and what I went through and everything that drove me to that moment, was God's will. And when people go, well, explain that to me. So I was a contractor for roughly 18 years, subcontractor. I did commercial and industrial plumbing. March of 2015, I literally woke up and said, I'm resigning. I'm quitting. Today is the day. I called the office. I wrote out a letter of resignation. I gave 6 months. I went back to school. During the course of going back to school, I take photography as an elective. I fall in love with it. You know, I meet this person in Heidi, and she's a Disneyland person and does marathons. And so that's why I'm actually on the way to Disneyland with her.
Wow.
If I wouldn't have listened to that thing when woke up at 0400 in the morning saying, this is the day I'm quitting, I'm done with this, and just kept going forward with it, none of that would have ever happened. If I would have woke up late, if we would have lingered, one moment longer at the Quick Trip. There's so many things that people don't appreciate that had to be perfect that morning.
I really think that, what Klint and I try to get across to our students is the exact replica of what had happened. This is why we tell our students so much. It's imperative not to be in that fight. You will win 1,000% of the fights you're not in, but that doesn't mean ignore a situation that you can make change in, right? I mean, the Lord puts you in that position, just like you said, everything lined up. And there's been times that, I'm like, okay, I'm here because of, and I can trace it back and say, if I hadn't done this one thing or met this one person, I can literally look at 2 or 3 people in my life that we're sitting here and I'm looking at you right now and thanking God that you were there for that trooper because of 1 or 2 people that I decided to go out and do this one thing, and that led to me having a training company going forward all these years, and now a show with this great man Klint Macro. So and I try to tell my kids that too. My son's like, oh, I hate working at this job. I'm like, well, but don't look at it that way. Do the best you can do, and maybe some executive from a company is going to come in and look at you and say, man, you're a really hard worker. Why don't you come and work for me? I'll give you $100,000 a year. You can't look at the little things and say, this really sucks. I mean, you still do look at the little things and say,
we're human.
But you do the best you can in hopes that what you're doing pays off in other ways, or even in that same situation. Maybe you get a pay raise, something like that.
Yeah, and I think everything, and I refer to it as, it's the Lord's time. I mean, coming from me being a person who had devout faith and then, losing that faith because of things that had happened in my life, but then coming back to it, I believe that's what needed to happen. That was the road that I had to travel and walk down. And like you said, as far as, you win 1,000% of the fights that you're in or you're not in, I tell people that you don't train because it guarantees a win or a victory. You train to improve your odds of a positive outcome, no matter what. The job that you do, law enforcement, photography, being a doctor, firearms instructor, you train to improve your odds of a successful positive outcome. And when I say that, I could see the gears start to turning. Oh my gosh, you're absolutely right, because nothing is guaranteed. I mean, everything could have gone horribly wrong that morning. The gun could have jammed. I could have missed all my shots. They could have had a gun that I didn't happen to see, even though I'm counting those things down. The only time that I had a breakdown initially was when they were questioning me, and they said, start, stop as far as the interview process. And, he asked, what were you thinking? When you get there and you see that. And I hadn't thought about it until that moment. And I was actually overcome with hurt for Trooper Anderson, because this is a man who's given selflessly, at that point, 28 years of his life to law enforcement. And he's thinking, this is it. I'm going to die alone in the desert on my back, and no one's coming to help me. And it was so real for me to feel that. And it was just so overwhelming. And no person should ever be put in that situation where they feel that alone and that abandoned by everybody. And it was so hard for me. And then at the time, and then I stopped and they said, hey, let's take a break and everything. But it was just so real. And then over the course of Ed and I seeing each other and talking and everything like that, and we talked about it, he said that that's what he was feeling. He's like, dude, he's like, I tried kicking him off, hoping that he could get hit by an oncoming vehicle or something. And then, I was ready to give up. I was at the end, and then you showed up. And so to hear that and talk to him about it and everything, and still it feels very real to me now and everything like that. But people just don't get, they really don't. And so again, being on the show and people seeing this and everything like that, they need to realize it's real. I mean, we're over 3.5 years, or coming up on 3.5 years. And it still feels sometimes it's like yesterday with some of those emotions. And that's it. That's the that's the sacrifice we're willing to make as armed civilians, and saying this is the line that we're going to hold on a daily basis, and no one is going to hurt you on my watch. Amen. Personally. And this is what I'm willing to sacrifice. Gladly, here it is. That's part of it. I didn't turn to drugs. I didn't turn to alcohol. I was very fortunate, but I could see and understand so well how people could, because there were times where I wasn't sleeping for a day and a half, 2 days. I would literally pass out. I would have these horrific nightmares. I'd wake up and go, well, let's see how long I can keep not sleeping. But I could see where people would turn to, alcohol and drugs to help them cope with that.
To dull the pain.
Yeah, it's a hurt that's hard to describe, and unless you've experienced yourself, you can't, like you said, you can't fully fathom it. Or those triggers. The first time I was on the range after the shooting, the gunpowder, the smell of the gunpowder. The first time I was actually riding with DPS, it was a deer in the road that somebody hit, and the trooper had to put it down. And so after she does it, and anybody who's hunted elk, they're stout animals. She does it with a rifle. She does it with a headshot. Well, I grab the deer. I'm dragging it out of the road. But what am I doing? I can smell the blood, completely smell the blood. I can smell the gunpowder. I'm looking at cruiser lights hitting me right in the face. I was back on that mile marker 89. And at that point, I'm like, I'm done. I'm done for the night. So all those things are still very real. But again, if you're talking with people who have experienced it before, seeking quality professional help. Because I'll tell you what, the gal that I initially talked to that was a department therapist, she was nothing more than a glorified family counselor, and she actually made it worse. And I literally told her, it was the fourth time I saw her, you know what, I'm doing great. If I need you, I'll call you, because she was actually messing me up more than what I was experiencing. So all those key components, and I don't feel that there's enough access to that, especially for law enforcement and first responders. I believe most of those contracts go to the lowest bidder. So it's not, I'm not saying that someone who charges a minimal amount isn't good. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But there's not a whole lot of bona fides when it comes to that. And the stigma still that we have to, under any circumstances, have to be that alpha, that chest thumping alpha. Nothing's going to get to us. Nothing's going to hurt us. And that's just not the case.
Anybody out there that's dealing with something like this, that don't give up on one counselor like you did. You had the counselor, you realized that wasn't helpful. You sought extra help. You understood that I've got to have extra, help somebody else. There's somebody else out there. Those people out there struggling PTSD, don't give up on that. Don't just say, okay, well, I tried the counseling thing and it didn't work. Well, that just because that one didn't work doesn't mean that you won't find the right one that will work. So the other point too is for my fellow brothers and sisters in blue out there in law enforcement that think that civilians should be disarmed and only law enforcement should have it. There's a very few out there. This gentleman right here is exactly one of the reasons exactly why civilians should totally be armed, because they're not just there to uphold the Constitution and keep our government from turning into a tyranny, but they're also there for personal protection, theirs and ours.
Great point, Matt. Great point. Educated and armed citizenry is our true homeland security and our fourth check and balance of a constitutional republic.
Yes.
Very true.
Absolutely.
How can people learn more about your photography business? Maybe give you business that way and stalk you, follow you.
Stalk me, follow me. So you can find me on Facebook, Thomas Yoxall. I don't really post anything personal to that, but all my photography work ends up there through various posts. If people want to follow me on Instagram, because I know this is a social media connected world, it's Shure Shot Photo. I also have Shure Shot Productions on Instagram, which is all my tactical photography, gun match photography and everything. I'm not hard to find. They type my name in and, oh, look at that ugly mug. It's Thomas. I always tell people, have camera, will travel. So.
Cool. Very cool. Well, it's been awesome having you on. We really appreciate you, taking the time and telling your story to our listeners, our followers.
No, it's been a pleasure. Again, thank you guys. I'm humbled to be your guest, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
It was great meeting you. Thank you for being on the show.
Pleasure to meet you again too.
Okay. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
There's a lot of sponsors that make this show possible, like Mantis.
Make sure you check them out and give them your business.
This episode is brought to you by Mantis. Mantis X helps shooters suck less. Meet the Pressers is sponsored by Next Level Training, Saber Red, Cutting Edge Bullets, the USCCA, McLean Corporation, ASP, Custom Poker Chip Company, Common Sense Self-Defense, and T1 Ammunition. Meet the Pressers is also generously supported by these fine companies, ranges, and our Patreon members. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the show.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, click the little bell, come on Patreon, help support us that way, come to one of our classes, or host us, we can come to you and do one of our courses at your location.
So until next time,
adieu.
Thank you for watching Meet the Pressers.